I request everyone to kindly take their seats so that we can proceed with the next session. Good afternoon, everyone. The next session for the evening is a session on promoting thermal comfort through climate-smart interventions and investments. The speakers for the evening are Mr. Mehul Jain, Climate Change Specialist, the World Bank; Mr. John A. Room, Regional Director for South Asia Sustainable Development, the World Bank; Mr. Sanjay Seth, Senior Director, Sustainable Habitat, TERI; Mr. Arnab Bandyopadhyay, Lead Transport Specialist, Program Leader, the World Bank; Ms. Shikha, Senior Program Lead, Council on Energy and Environment, Water; Dr. S.N. Srinivas, former CEO, Rural Electrification Corporation, CSR Foundation. I welcome all speakers onto the stage and Mr. Mehul Jain to deliver the context of the evening.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session on climate investment opportunities in the cooling sector. So I'm going to take you through a short presentation which will give you a sense of the report that we've put together. This report was launched yesterday, and just giving you a context, and then obviously everyone on the panel who's here has been involved with this report in some way or the other, either through consultations or providing direct inputs or peer reviewing it. So very grateful that we have all of them on the panel today. So the context for this is, why we got involved as an institution was primarily the number of heat stress events in India was increasing at a fast pace. In fact, the 6th IPCC report, assessment report, spoke about heat waves increasing in frequency and intensity in India. And estimates suggest that about 160 to 200 million people could be under heat stress by the end of 2030. Further, what's the most important aspect of this? This is not just about heat stress. It's about lives, livelihoods, and different sectors in general, right? So if you look at cold storages, for instance, India loses about $13 billion worth of food because of inadequate cold chains. So what we did was, the government of India has done a great job of understanding this risk, and they came up with what is called the India Cooling Action Plan back in 2019. And the fascinating part about that action plan for me as a technical person was that it has 130 plus opportunity areas where you could really invest in. And we are trying to grapple with, what is an area where, say, the bank or any similar multilateral institution could get involved. So we broke the plan down and into sectoral roadmaps. So we looked at 4 specific sectors: space cooling, cold chains, both pharma and agri, and mobile air conditioning, and refrigerants. And essentially looked at both short-term, medium-term, and long-term solutions and prioritized them around concession financing. So this is what the prioritization matrix looked like. So at the first level of prioritization, we looked at the benefits and implementability. The benefits, looking at the direct benefits coming from GHG mitigation potential. The indirect benefits were things like lives and livelihoods, so job creation potential and the SDGs. And the implementation was around the pyramid, typically, the technical feasibility, the likelihood of adoption at scale, and most importantly, the administrative feasibility, right? Do we have the right policies to take this forward? And the second level of prioritization, which was more to understand where concession financing can really help open up markets was done more from a multilateral sort of perspective, and then really looking at how multilateral financing could help unlock the market for the private sector. So I'll just take you through the 4 key areas, which is space cooling. Space cooling as an opportunity area is about $1.5 trillion as per the analysis. And of that, 1.28 million is in the residential sector, whereas about 230 million odd is in the commercial buildings. India is at a very interesting crossroad, right? Because about 40 to 50% of the building stock that we need has not been built yet. So it really gives you an opportunity to change the way you develop, really bend the curve on using more sustainable technologies for construction. So the 4 areas that really came out for us were mainstreaming thermal comfort in affordable housing through policies and investments, enabling market transformation towards super efficient, high energy impact cooling technologies. So things like super efficient air conditioners, super efficient fans, supporting the uptake of tri-generation systems. And this is, if you consolidate demand across buildings and a set of buildings and urban agglomeration, what you see is with tri-generation systems, you could really reduce the demand, the energy demand by about 60 to 70%. And mainstreaming passive cooling measures in urban planning. This is more of a long-term measure, really looking at how we plan our cities, looking at nature-based solutions, and integrating them in the urban planning. The next is cold chains and refrigeration, and this sector essentially, the most important aspect of this is that it lacks investment and it's a fragmented sector. And the 2 big interventions that we were supporting through concessional financing, which we want to support, are around the development of sustainable energy efficient cold chains and promoting better operations. So think of farmer user groups. If you're able to provide them with the right technical know-how, so they'll be able to manage the cold chain network on their own. Passenger transport, this is a small area, probably the smallest intervention area of the ICAP, only about an $8 billion market. But in India, by 2023, the passenger air conditioning or mobile air conditioning market is going to be about $1 billion. So that really tells you how quickly this market is going to grow in India. And the labeling system that's Shikha and I were just talking before this, the government of India has already started working towards the labeling program and really towards moving away from the HFCs. The last is around refrigerants, and refrigerants we did not touch on the transitions primarily because India is a signatory to the Kigali Amendment, and there is a plan there. The phase-out plan is there. We're really looking at the training part of it and looking at how, on 2 parts. How do you train technicians so that they're able to service air conditioners better? And then also looking at the recovery of refrigerants. So to sum it up, this is where we've reached with this report. The 4 key areas where we think we need to continue to engage is stakeholder engagement, sessions such as these, and also having the government counterpart and trying to understand what are the different incentive structures that one needs to create for the private sector to invest into the sector. A conducive policy environment is very critical. As we saw across the 4 sectors, there is a need for policy intervention, and once that's done appropriately, one could really start seeing the private sector to invest. Innovative financial instruments such as cooling bonds or carbon markets can be leveraged, and I'll let the panel discuss this in greater detail. And on regional cooperation, best practices that can be shared across across the region. So India is really leading on the cooling agenda for now. We've got the cooling action plan. So how can India really take this knowledge to other countries? The second part is about being a regional manufacturing hub, right? The demand for cooling and cooling technologies is going to be the most in this region. So is there an element of regional cooperation that for trade that can really be built upon? And the last I would say is around data sharing. The session before, we definitely spoke about data systems, but it's really important from when you're talking about early warning systems for heat waves. If there is regional integration of data and data sharing is allowed, then you can have better solutions. So this is the report. You can download it from this link. And now I'll hand over the mic to John. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Mehul, for that great summary of what is a complex report and a lot of detailed analytics that went into it. We've got a wonderful panel. I think you all introduced by the moderator at the beginning, so I won't repeat that. Looking forward to a great discussion. Just in terms of the roadmap of the discussion, I want to start a little bit with buildings, then go to affordable housing, then go to cold chain, then go to innovation, financing, and how we get action. So maybe also, since you're the outsider looking in, Sanjay, can you maybe talk a little bit about what kinds of incentives and facilities and actions are needed to encourage sustainable cooling solutions in buildings in the country?
Okay, yeah, John, thank you very much. And I see that I'm privileged by not being present there. Apologies, of course, at the outset for not being able to really join you in person. But nevertheless, grateful to you all that you could join online. So, in terms of incentives, of course, as Mehul made an excellent presentation by way of what the report really looks like. I think what really stands out is that in terms of the regulatory frameworks in terms of policy instruments, they are in somewhat way already available at the ground level. But it is the frameworks for its effective implementation that probably needs to be enhanced, right? So that is one of the things. The second thing, of course, is that Mehul also very correctly pointed out that there is a lot of built, infrastructure which needs to be put in place, and that in terms of opportunity, it is huge. And the residential sector is going to take the lead as compared to the commercial sector. So obviously, the cooling loads really going up in the residential sector. Those could be, flattening of the curve could take place through the right design interventions, because at the very baseline, we need to ensure that the thermal comforts for the masses or for the people at large are really being able to deliver, even through very kind of cheap means of cooling interventions. So design plays an important role, and how do we go about incentivizing this? So there are, of course, incentives which have been put in place by various municipalities and by state governments in terms of helping developers to make sure that the buildings of tomorrow are better in terms of design as they were constructed as of yesterday. And those would help to flatten the curve in terms of bringing down the cooling load requirements. There are also rating agencies which are complementing these efforts of the government, and the tools that are used to roll out these incentives are the tools that like GRIA or LEED or IGBC, all of these ratings, they become the essential tools which the municipalities use to roll out these incentives. Of course, so that's on the demand side, but on the supply side, I think the India Cooling Action Plan is well equipped to make sure that the energy efficiencies on the equipment, on one hand, they go up, and on the other hand, the design interventions on the supply, on the demand side, both of them, the top-down and the bottoms-up work together. The regulations are already in place, as I said, and I think we should be able to see the picture looking better in the years ahead. But of course, besides that, the viability of these solutions through effective business models is very important, and also having a critical mass of people who are really going to be effectively kind of delivering this is, I think, very important. So these are a couple of things which come to my mind initially, and I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Sanjay. Could I just check with the audience? Could you hear Sanjay clearly? No? Oh, so if the audio people can see, if they can cover, I was wondering whether it was the flow back from here. So we heard a lot of what you said, Sanjay, and since we've been on so many panels of this so many times before, I know 90% of what you're going to say, but thank you very much. What I heard from that is there's design, there's implementation, there's incentives, we need to move on the business model, and I also heard a little bit of an element of glass half full, glass half empty. Things that are moving, but we need to accelerate and move forward, and it's not going to be done overnight. But you also opened a very nice segue to Dr. Srinivas. So could you maybe drill down and tell us a little bit about the opportunities for integrating sustainable cooling solutions in the affordable housing sector in India, and not just the opportunity, but what would it take to do it?
Thank you. When I kind of looked at this whole cooling solutions, I had earlier worked in making commercial buildings, energy efficiency in commercial buildings, energy conservation building codes which Bureau of Energy Efficiency has brought out, how to implement it. So, when we went to this, BE has made a policy, but then it has to go all the way from BE to the buildings. How does it go? It goes to the states, urban departments. They have to make the legislation. Then it has to go to the ULBs, urban local bodies. They have to make the legislation. And they have to include it as in their bylaws. There are already 42 bylaws in buildings, and this would be the 43rd. Nobody was willing to do it. Now, how to include it is also not just a matter of anything, but it also includes technical matter. So, while designing this proposal, we developed something like energy conservation building code cells. So, who not only sat in the the departments, helped them make these legislation documents, but that was not sufficient for the states to they want to see this kind of buildings. So you will have to help with the software and then get those buildings going. And so you have demonstration buildings. We did demonstration buildings, almost about 160 buildings, accumulating to about 2.5 million meters square. And as the end of the project, after doing all this, about 23 states had legislation in place at the Urban Development Department. Only a few cities had at the ULBs. Only Greater Municipality of Hyderabad actually included in the bylaws. And few buildings got approved in a proper process, and it became kind of mandatory. It took so much, 4 to 5 to 6 years. But now, what is the shortcut to immediately demonstrate it? This is a long process. So, when we were doing this cooling action plan, what are we discussed about what kind of interventions can be quick and showcase the results. So, one was this window of affordable housing, Prime Minister's Awas Yojana, both rural and urban. So, we looked at this because it doesn't have to probably go through that kind of a grill. It may have to go through the central government and the implementing housing department at the state level. So we thought there is an opportunity, and then looked at it, whether what it means in terms of the investment, what it means in terms of the, whether we can achieve some good energy efficiency. In commercial buildings, one could achieve the EPI, Energy Performance Index, from 200 to 100. It is quite possible. In 160 buildings, I think the achievement was 30 to 50%. So in this residential area, EPIs are in the range of 40 to 70 kilowatt hour per meter square. So there also, when we looked at it, when we analyzed, in the urban area, in the multi-floor buildings, it was like 60 to 85% was the savings that was possible. Whereas in the rural single-floor houses, when we saw it is not only meeting all the energy needs, you do all the energy efficiency measures like solar passive, you do efficient appliances, you do then add the solar roof. All this together, it will give all the comfort that is required, thermal comfort, and all the energy that it requires. We could actually produce about 70 to 80% more energy than you really require. So each unit is a powerhouse, green powerhouse, and you can sell the power. Only thing that we have to immediately start is do this bundling, some 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 houses, and demonstrate it. I heard another chief executive officer who is here. I think he has demonstrated at least part of it in 500 houses. I don't know, he was there in the morning, but so there is enough room for saving, and it's not only net zero, but definitely in a way positive, contributing to energy production.
Very good. So I have a follow-up question before I go to Arnab. Is the glass half full or half empty? Because I'm trying to figure out what your message is. Because you started off about how complicated this process is. Then you said you wanted to look for a shortcut through the Prime Minister's Affordable Housing Program. You didn't quite conclude as to whether you saw what that pathway is. Then you went on to say there's a huge opportunity, a technical opportunity, that really sounded exciting. So now this glass is looking very full. But then you said, well, okay, we're trying to prove it and try and scale it out. So where are we in terms of putting this thing on steroids, these ideas on steroids? Do we have a shortcut to getting this done in affordable housing? The ideas that you've talked about, how is it 20 years to get the benefits in single-unit houses that you talked about in rural areas, or can we do it in 5 years? What would it take?
If you are looking at the returns on the investment, it is a little longer. If you look at, you will have to invest about, let's say, affordable house is about 5 lakh rupees. And all these interventions would cost about 1 lakh, 1.2 lakh additional. So in a year, if you look at, you're looking at about generating 2,000 units of power. So if you calculate it, it will be about 9 to 10 years in terms of the payback. Quite often, 9 to 10 years is not very attractive. 2 to 3 years is something attractive. People would invest. You can create other incentives to pull them to invest. But anything about 3 years or 5 years, there has some incentives, that question you asked just a while ago. I think incentives have to kick in. But what happens with that kind of, you make in 100,000 houses in affordable housing, the costs dip down. And you have the knowledge. Different business models will kick in. Somebody will square, just the way you have the solar roofs now, you don't have to invest. You will have an agreement for 5 years or 10 years, and the vendor will come and put the solar roof. This I did for UNDP 55 Lodi Estate. So those models will kick in.
Very good. Okay, I'll take that as glass half full and optimistic. Arnab, let's move on to you. Could shift a little bit to cold chains and transportation. I think this is, if we're thinking about higher incomes for farmers, lower food loss and waste, for all the things that does. We just went through COVID with transporting various medicines. Clearly, these cold chains are important. Again, similar question. What is the scope to do more? What would it take? How do we accelerate this in cold chains and transportation?
working. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks to the organizers for having me here. Yeah, John, as you have rightly mentioned, I think the potentials are huge for cold chain and the current relevance. We see the world is going through a food crisis, and Mehul mentioned as that $13 billion worth of food loss in India. So definitely there is a lot to do there. Also, the whole issue of, or the whole opportunity of kind of value chain transformation and enhancing export potential. That's a huge untapped area, which actually cold chain can definitely contribute much. Having said that, where are we? I think the current situation is a bit humbling. A lot to do. If you look at the different elements of the cold chain, we have to think, a little bit prioritizing perhaps the pack house. The NCCD report also says that up to 2037-38, if we have to invest in this sector about $11.5 billion or close to $12 billion, $8.5 billion will have to be done for pack houses. Only our estimate is perhaps only about 10 to 15% of what is required. The pack houses are there, so the rest needs to be built. In terms of the temperature control logistics, the reefers, the containers also, perhaps it's also 10%, which is existing today. Now, getting into the various elements of the cold chain, I think if we kind of unpack the pack house a little bit, the three elements of pack house, one is buildings. I'm not getting into it. A lot has been already mentioned, how to create incentive, what are the challenges. Both Sanjay ji and Dr. Srinivas mentioned about it. The second part is very important, is the equipment bit and the energy efficiency of equipment. And we have schemes. We have the Ujala scheme, as you know, CESL had done for LED bulb, and that can be definitely extended and being extended to various other elements of equipment. And third is the plant like chilling plants, etc., for milk, where again the kind of energy efficiency schemes like PAT schemes, those can be applied, and the various elements can definitely benefit from it. But I think the market failure is not only in terms of in cold chain, only in the infrastructure and connectivity, but a lot also on skills and technology. So perhaps a little bit on that, if I may touch upon. In terms of skills, ICAP has a huge target, 100,000 specialized professional. States will have to also play its role. And some of these are actually quite a bit specialized areas, including the logistic chain. I mean, driving the reefer truck is not easy. How to control your temperature, when to do that. And I think there is again an excellent opportunity here to align with the Skill India program, Skill India mission. Not much has been done about it. The National Skill Development Corporation perhaps will have to do a little bit more focus in this sector, and not just looking into transportation, but specialized transportation for logistic chain, for cold chain. And the application of, I think, technology and digital, huge. There are a lot of low-hanging fruits. Many other countries are showing us, in terms of use of sensors, IoT, that can also be done through all of the elements of the cold chain. So these are the areas where to focus, and in all of these areas, again, I see a lot of private sector opportunity actually to finance. So the list is long, but a beginning has been made, and we must do more. Maybe later in the program we can talk a little bit about the state's roles also in this. So let me stop here.
Okay, thank you, Arnab. So my follow-up question is in response to your list is long. So there's a lot of things. Clearly the size of the prize is big. And you went through a lot of things that can be done. Okay, you talk about pack houses, cars, technology, finance, all sorts of different actors, skills, different kinds of skills, putting it all together. So clearly there's not one silver bullet. It's going to take a lot of actors and a lot of actions. But is there something that's more important than others to kickstart it? Where do you start? Is there something that will create a ripple effect? If you did A first, the rest will follow? Or how do we prioritize amongst the things that you're talking about?
Obviously, so you have to do a prioritization, and I would say even in the entire cold chain, I think the area to focus is essentially the energy efficiency of equipment, and to some extent also how can we integrate RE. I mean, we are sitting in Kerala, which has a 2040 target of 100% RE. And as Dr. Srinivas was mentioning, I think some of the elements have also green energy generation capability and putting into the grid. So I think that's definitely the whole equipment and the plant area is something to definitely focus on in cold chain. Also, there are low-hanging fruits in the temperature control logistics. This company, Revigo, if I may just take the name, they're doing a very interesting job. In fact, they are one of the aggregator in the freight sector and also provide value-added services. So they are actually training the existing truck drivers on how to operate essentially their, the whole reefer truck, when to cool, if the engine is closed, then what needs to be done, etc. When there is a changeover of drivers. So I think those are kind of low-hanging fruits which has a lot of return, both in terms of economic financial return and as well as in terms of energy savings return. We have this big now the logistic, the PM Gati Shakti master plan, and the logistic master plan, or multimodal master plan, which are being prepared both at the central level, at the state level. As a part of that, they're also looking at the warehousing policies. So I think that's also, we do not have a pack house policy today. And in that, how to bring in the opportunity for private financing, how to bring in the energy conservation measures is very important, which is a work which I think is, again, needs to be prioritized so that it can actually open up investment opportunities and private sector participation opportunities in the future in this. So I believe those are
very good.
A few of those.
Thank you. Which then brings me to the next question. Clearly, the size of the prize is large. There's a big opportunity out there. But business as usual isn't going to get us there. We've got to have innovation. Technological innovation and business model innovation came through both of what you said. You talked about technology, innovation, and business model technology. So Shikhar Basin, can you maybe talk a little bit about what is happening in the area of innovation? And if you want to talk technology and business models, that'd be great. And what more would be needed and how would we encourage a speeding up of this innovation process going forward?
Thank you. First of all, congratulations to the team on, I'm hoping this was the final launch. I feel like I've seen this study at least 4 times now, but it's a great investment plan. And it's encouraging to see that the India Cooling Action Plan, which, sort of got started to develop back in 2016, in 2022, we're actually seeing financing instruments being spoken about, and a lot of what was put in that policy document get implemented. And I think in addition to technology and business models, I think we also should take a moment to recognize that there's been a lot of policy innovation in India when it comes to cooling. There was the politicking that happened under the Kigali Amendment, where India, for the first time in an international agreement, created a separate track and timeline for itself, with hot ambient temperature countries. Soon after that, we saw a multi-stakeholder effort that went on for about a year and a half, which resulted in the launch of the India Cooling Action Plan, which was the first cooling action plan in the world, which took that Kigali Amendment target and suited it to what India's development really required it to look like. And identified opportunities, baselines, and data across all of the sectors that have already been spoken about, as well as the size of the challenge and therefore the opportunity that comes with it. I had the privilege of being part of the development of the India Cooling Action Plan along with a lot of other people. And one of the things that I'm really happy to report on R&D specifically, right, because I was involved in the authorship of the research and development subsector. Back from 2016 to now, and last year we did a mapping of all of the innovations that are going on in the cooling domain in India. So back when we started this work, we know that a government program had been launched and they had seen no takers. Nobody actually signed up to want to be a part of this public-private cooperation to leverage the commitments that were being made under the Kigali Amendment to start moving towards lower GWP refrigerants. And back in July, which is when we concluded the first mapping, we identified over 160 innovation initiatives that are squarely within the cooling domain, and even within the cooling domain, much more involved in the refrigeration and air conditioning sector. So I'm not even counting the automobile sector, so on and so forth. And their primary motivation behind all of this is energy efficiency, right? So I think industry has got the memo. Whether it has come through, the net zero conversation, whether it's coming through Kigali, whether it's just coming from their own energy constraints, right, and spending. I think there is a lot of vigor with which companies are approaching innovation. I think what is really missing is information that targets low GWP and energy efficiency together. That's something that I think all of us in this room should be thinking a lot harder about, because I think there's enough financing for low GWP that will come to be, there's enough financing for energy efficiency, but the point is, how do you bring those two together to make sure that the impacts are being felt in a much bigger and compounded manner? A second area where there is a lot of innovation that is needed is in being able to bring these technologies that are low GWP, that are highly efficient, in a very accessible manner into the markets, right? And when I say accessible, it's not just that they're available for me to be able to buy them easily, but that they are also affordable, right? And with that, I think we need to think about demand aggregation programs, so on business model innovations, things like on-bill financing, things like procurement schemes, which could be voluntary, made mandatory over a certain period of time. Looking at cooling as a service, which is, I think there's a lot of work and a lot of assessments being done around how that could really work in countries like India, where there's so much clustered and high density of population. So really thinking about some of these business models and focusing our innovative attention there. And I think the likes of the World Bank are really well suited to support India in that effort. And I think on the pure R&D side of it, I think we should be very clear in what the mission is. India has moved beyond, we have a fairly strong, engineering caliber in this country. And I think our understanding of the problems goes back to traditional times. I think we were way more adaptive maybe 50 years ago than we are today when it comes to heat stress. But I think we need to start thinking about technology cooperation in a manner that is actually going to be fit for purpose for India. So what should those early warning systems look like? What should a resilient city plan that actually targets heat stress look like? How do you ensure that the folks who are going to be coming into your houses are being able to carry equipments on a two-wheeler as opposed to a pickup truck, as is the case when you need to talk about refrigerant recycling and not just sort of venting it out up in the air. So I think innovation that is targeted at these very localized issues, but the size of the problem is huge, which still makes it sexy enough to do, I hope.
Thank you. So again, similar sort of question broadly comes down to how do we put this on steroids? So basically what I hear you say is there's a lot of innovation already taking place, particularly on the R&D, that front-end side. You said the companies have got the memo on energy efficiency. You've gone through a number of areas where there needs to be business model, this area, that area. You've talked about a number of these things. India has a track record of innovation in a number of areas by using these metrics of degree of innovation and green innovation relative to GDP. India is up there. So with all of those pieces, what would it take to accelerate innovation in this area, in particular as it goes from the R&D to the market development? What will be your priorities? Not 27 things, but what are the 2 or 3 big things?
I think really putting a lot of money behind demand aggregation programs.
Behind what?
putting money behind demand aggregation programs, right? So whether that is public procurement, or it is just demand aggregation by bulk procurement, which could happen from private sectors, it could happen through banks. I would really say that that is perhaps the first thing that needs to happen, because that will also encourage industries to make those investments greater, right? I think the technology exists, but if there's not going to be enough demand for it, things will continue to move at the pace at which they are moving currently.
So this is the LED light bulbs model.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one model. You also have cooling as a service, which is a model. We've also seen like other utility aspects sort of playing in, and I know that there are experiments happening in the country on how do you sort of tackle peak load management, because a lot of it is coming out of air conditioning consumption. So I think the models are there, the pieces are there, the actors are there. I think we just need a really substantive push with financing to really kind of bring it into.
Okay, so as I said, we'll come back to two issues. One is how do we answer the push on the financing, and how do we accelerate implementation? But now I didn't give any of you a warning. We're in the session after lunch, so I'm willing to bet 50% of you are asleep and digesting the wonderful food. But I'm going to be a little counterintuitive. Usually we wait till the end of the session to give 2 minutes for a question from the audience. We've got a great audience here. Any questions or interventions? And then we'll come back to the panel later. Hand at the back there. And introduce yourself when you get the mic. Even if I know who you are, not everybody might know.
My name is Vijay Kalavakonda from the International Finance Corporation, the World Bank Group. The question that I have, this issue that we've been talking about, food losses, food waste, lack of cold chain, I think these are things that I think we've been hearing now for donkey's years. Yeah. And then on the other hand, we've been saying that there is so much innovation being happening, new technology coming in, even including the Tech Emerge of the World Bank Group, where we've been on the cooling program that we've been trying to do, bringing out these new technologies and all those things. So new solutions have been coming out. But the question is, if you go today, even now, we are talking about the issue that there is lack of cold chains, TCLs, and all those things. So here's the fundamental question is, what is it? Is it a supply issue or is it a demand issue? Is there a lack of a demand or is it that there is lack of supply? I'm still struggling to understand, because currently I'm based in Kathmandu, Nepal, talking to people, was talking to some of the high-value agriculture traders, like the ginger traders and the turmeric traders. Their problem is when they are wanting to sell in the lucrative markets like Europe and others, the traders there are asking for a supply that you can give me year-round, 12 months a year, not around the harvest time. Okay? What is it stopping? One of the things that is stopping is because they don't have cold chains to store, to basically be able to supply year-round. Okay? So I think this comes out as a fundamental question. Why and what is it? Is it a demand issue or is it a supply issue? And is there a learning that one can take, for example, what we have done in the non-perishable commodities? Because my own learning in the non-perishable commodities is that we have created infrastructure. When we say we, including through the World Bank projects, including through the government's own initiative, so there have been several warehouses and godowns that have been built. But the throughput in these warehouses are not more than about 15-20%. So infrastructure is there, but it's not getting used. Okay? So this raises the fundamental question, and hence I think we would love to hear from the esteemed panel and people who are around. What is it? Is it a demand issue or is it a supply issue? Where are we failing?
Very good. So I think that's an excellent question. So if we've been talking about it for donkey's years, why is it taking so long? So just a preemption or a trailer for something to come later. As a number of my panelists know, this is not the first and this is not the last animal you're going to hear in this discussion. You'll hear about another animal later. You'll hear about the donkeys. But let's answer the question. Is it a supply issue or is it a demand issue?
I actually think it's a misinformation issue, and the second part of it is, let me talk about misinformation first. So when you say is it a demand issue, the manufacturers of the technology or of the solutions feel that the demand is not enough. The person who actually wants to buy it finds it a little bit too expensive because the number of suppliers are not enough. And I think this is where civil society becomes really important in a country like India, because we're able to publicly put out what the size of that solution is actually going to be, right? So we know that 40% of our food losses happen because 90% of the cold chain in India doesn't exist. But what we don't know, that rural India is a $50 billion market waiting for decentralized renewable energy solutions for productive livelihoods. And a lot of that is going to be cold chain because it's agriculture based, right? So I think the minute you start positioning the size of the valuation and the solutions to the people who are sitting on the technologies or other solution providers, you're immediately encouraging them to be a little bit more risk averse, if I could say, to move into markets where the demand has not been aggregated as of now. And I think a second big issue is that who will pay for it, right? Which goes back to my previous intervention, that even when the demand and the supply are not necessarily contentious or are not issues in and of themselves. The question is who pays for it? Is it the household that is going to have to double its food spending? Is it the farmer who is barely who's barely making two ends meet, who now has to pay for cold chain without being clear on what the business ROI is going to be? So I think it's more of a misinformation game rather than anything else.
Okay, so thank you on that. I'm going to go to the other speakers to run, but can I just do a quick follow-up on this one? I take the point on the business innovation, but this is the second time that you've mentioned information, and you mentioned civil society. So in a country with a large number of smart people, with a very active civil society, what is the problem with innovation, with information? What is the externality that's not stopping this information flow, and what would it take to break that free?
Yeah, that's a tricky question in terms of what is the solution going to be. I can talk a lot about the problem because I'm a researcher. But I think the problem essentially is that the Amirza is not talking about sustainable cooling enough, right? It's not a sexy enough challenge. It's not a new climate mitigation technology. There are layers of information that are reaching different people. So some people think, for example, within industry, right, that after 30 years of pushing forward, they finally have the memo that yes, energy efficiency is important, right? And so SMEs are putting money behind energy efficiency innovations. SMEs also know some kind of a gas transition is in the conversation. But what that's going to look like, what that means for them, nobody knows. Closer home, right? We all get our air conditioners serviced. We know we're supposed to. How many of us realize that almost 80% of the efficiency of your unit depends on good installation and good service practices, right? So you know it's good for you, but you really know how good it is for you. And I think that's what I mean by information, it's like it's a problem of lemons. So you have some understanding of it, but not the entire understanding, and so therefore the level of action remains almost lackadaisical.
So you're saying basically different stakeholders understand different parts of the problem, but not all of it. Can you hold a second? Dr. Srinivas wanted to come at an Arnab, and then I'll come back to you.
It's a really good question. I can try to give an example based on the pilot that I managed on the agri-value chain. We all know 30% is the food agriculture produce loss. Now, if you see, every mile there is an issue. First mile, the farmer cannot store the produce for a while, and he cannot get the better price, and it gets wasted. You do not have a cold chain there. You have cold chain which are big, large ones. Then you will have to move it to the only for certain producers it's being catered to. Something like tomato, something like beetroot, all these things. I was looking at one intervention I was managing in Jharkhand. So it's a 5 metric ton capacity, and about 100 farmers manage this farmer producer organization. Anytime the price is lesser than 20 rupees per kilo, they would put it into the solar cold storage. Anytime that is higher than market price is higher than 20 rupees per kilo, they will take it and market it. This is how they do. Now, question is why this is not getting replicated. I also found out about 1,000 or 1,500 of these equipment are there across the country. Not sufficient. We have so many millions of farmers. But so for your question of supply and demand, I would say missing link is there everywhere. In the supply side, in the demand side, in the innovation side, in the information side, in the kind of policy side, cost side also. So we'll have to fix it. Just the way things are fixed for solar. Two issues were there. One, the land. Second, the evacuation. These are fixed. Now, accepting the battery, you are now down from not long ago. 15 years ago, it was 20 rupees per kilo, whatever. Now it's 3 rupees per kilo, whatever. Agriculture produce, this value chain is one such thing. Second is the last mile. I was quite impressed with one of the multinational company which has come out with a very simple 8,000 rupees solution. I still have to figure it out, but I'm just sharing that what I saw. Push carts, that's the last mile of the agriculture produce. And particularly the leafy vegetables have to be sold quickly, by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Otherwise, it will all get wasted. So they have come up with very frugal innovation of reflective film on the push cart. And that reduces the temperature by 8 to 12 degrees centigrade. They have done a limited pilot, but we'll have to figure out these solutions which cater to different target groups. Thank you.
Arnab, and then we'll go to the question, and then I'll give Sanjay a chance to come in later.
Sure, thanks. So I will be brief. A lot has been said about it. I also think that it is an information asymmetry issue largely, and also a scale issue. Let's not forget that the scale in this case, particularly of cold chain, when you're talking about agriculture produces small. So unless you have a kind of a state level or a national level transformational program, it's somewhat difficult. And I think the whole issue of the farmer producer organization, which also was mentioned in the presentation, and how to build their capacity and knowledge is critical in this.
As an aggregation.
As an aggregation. So there is a need for aggregation. There is also a need for distributed supply chains, sometimes smaller supply chain to manage the last mile issue. Vijay had, I think, another question, and I think one other problem which we have got in here in India, we did a study for West Bengal. We have locked ourselves into, a kind of a very traditional cold chain. I'll just give you an example. So West Bengal is a state which is famous for potato production, and it has actually the second largest in India in cooling space, which is largely used for potato. But what has happened in the last 15 years, if you see, the horticultural produce is growing. I mean, there is a huge crop diversification has happened in West Bengal. So 13-14% of horticulture products in India West Bengal produces. But we are locked in an infrastructure which can handle potato but not mango. So I think that's another problem. We have to reimagine our infrastructure, and it's not that easy. Sometimes while we have to build a new one, the existing ones have to be reimagined. I think that's the other challenge, Vijay.
Very good. There's a question there at the back.
I think some parts Srini had answered in the last part.
Introduce yourself.
Sorry, I'm Anil Das. I'm from the bank team, DRM team. So I think two things have to be done here. There is a lot of government schemes. I mean, when you're talking of scale, there is a lot of cold chain government schemes. First and foremost is that the technology and the specs which they are given there has to be revised. And a little bit of monitoring, that will change the game. Otherwise, what is happening is that the specifications there and the incentive which they are giving is going in a different direction. It's more towards a physical construction part and not the operational side. And most of that specification is now outdated in the changing realm. And the second part is that, Srini, you just hit the nail there. It has to be in at every stage, the cooling facility. Otherwise, it is not going to give you the aggregates for which buyer is going to come and take. Nobody is going to come and transport. Come around to pick up 1 ton or 2 ton. They would rather prefer to take because the cost of the economics of scale doesn't work. I think these two things I thought I should flag that. But one particular thing should be that the government schemes have to start doing this revision. Otherwise, that scaling cannot be done in many cases. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other interventions from the floor or questions? One here.
Hi everyone, my name is Dhiren Subramanian. I'm working with WRI India. It's a research organization, by the way. So my question is to you, Dr. Srinivas. So you mentioned about multiple challenges that you faced while implementing ECBC across the states. So for that, we had to establish ECBC cell in different states, and the state designated agencies were assigned to do the task of implementing ECBC in the respective states as well. But the India Cooling Action Plan still is a national level document, and it's a very broad document. But it's a very good initiative. It still remains as a very national level, broad, generic document. So when it comes to the implementation, it has to happen at the subnational level. So what do you think? What should be the implementation framework for making sure that the recommendations listed in the Cooling Action Plan are getting implemented at the subnational level?
Excellent. So there's a question of going from the national to the subnational.
Yes.
Since you were called out by name, let's go to you first. But I know Arnab put in a placeholder earlier to intervene on this one, so we'll go to him next. And then we'll give Sanjay a chance, because I know it's difficult to intervene when you're on the video there.
Okay. This question we actually debated, when Mehul and all the team, Karan, everybody, the team which developed this document. It's just not a document, they want to implement it. That's the objective with which this document was kind of prepared. Because the ICAP document is already there in the government, and they have produced a wonderful document. But we have to go much more deeper into it. We discussed this. What would help? Because if you look at just ECBC, it constitutes just about 15% of the residential building area and investment. So residential building is going to be even more difficult. Commercial buildings you will have to kind of, they cater to a lot of, submissions. So we discussed this, and I think things are put together in the document to an extent. One thought was whether SPV, special purpose vehicle, to realize this was one of the thought. But ultimately, some options are put together. One of the things is SPV. I fully agree, unless we have some such support system at the state level, any of this, whether agriculture value chain, residential cooling, unless there is some kind of a support system, it is not easy. So that is why we came up with, we discussed, and this affordable housing is one window. Central government, state government, one department. That's it. So if these two are managed, you can push the idea. And once you push the idea, the techniques, the technologies, the products, all will get, it's in huge number. We are talking about 40 million houses in the affordable housing. Even you think about 5 million gets done, then that scale itself will pull it in the private mass houses. So you don't probably need another big infrastructure, which John was completely taken aback on. This kind of complexities should we be doing. So that's why take an easy way out with the affordable housing. Pick up few states where people show, the governmental counterparts show interest, demonstrate it in good scale, 50,000 houses, 100,000 houses, and the market will pull. This is the thought that we did have. Thank you.
So bite-sized pieces to start. Small bite-sized pieces to start.
Very quick. My take is this, yes, it's actually at a very high-level document stage, but it is complex. It is addressing many areas. I think we need to find opportunity where we can align with similar strategies, like, in many cases for cold chain, you may have to see how can we align with the logistics strategy, the energy efficiency story, how can we align with the state level climate action plan. So it's not that we need to reproduce the India climate action plan and have Kerala's the climate action plan. We need to find out those opportunities, the elements of that plan, how we can integrate better with the other plans.
Thank you. Sanjay, over to you. There's been a lot of discussion since you last spoke. Where would you like to intervene?
So, John, I think while I agree with many of the things, so I will not really go into the frameworks for regulation and implementation. But I think what we really need to do is empower the people who are really at the, at the end of it. I mean, the consumers who are really going to be using these buildings. To my mind, I think they are the ones who really need to be provided or they need to be empowered with these. They need to play a very critical role as far as if you really want to scale it up. And when I say that, I think it's eventually going to impact them. It's because thermal comforts, safety, all kinds of things are actually aimed at the end users. So how do we really go about? If you really want the plan to be very successful, start involving the end user in taking those decisions through maybe cost-effective solutions. Let them understand, because they always think sustainability is always associated with a cost, right? So the first cost becomes a big impediment. How do you really go about demystifying this myth that green does not cost more? So that is number one. So empower them with the position of knowledge. Provide them with cost-effective solutions. Let them understand that, okay, this is low cost, no cost. Ensure thereafter that there is enough availability of material in the market, because the markets work on demand and supply. And if people find that there is no value and the products, green products are not really going to find a takeaway from in the markets, why should they really go about producing them, the manufacturers? So I think it's a combination that really works. Regulations, as I said, are in place. As we mentioned that, the states, at the subnational level, enough effort has been put together by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. I remember when we were all working together, Srinivas, colleagues who are now working with the World Bank, Karan, all of us, we work towards that. So all of those things are already in place. But I think somehow the missing piece is the end consumer. And the Star Living program for the appliances, I think, is a big example from where we can learn. And I think that is the final piece which will really probably look at big scale-ups happening. Thank you.
So you're saying focus on the end consumer is your core message, yeah?
That's right, John.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, very good. So let's open up any more interventions or questions from the audience. Abbas.
Yes, hi, I'm Abbas Shah from the World Bank. So this is mainly to Shikha. So I'm a little puzzled because if you look at the report, there are a couple of things that are very low-hanging fruit, which you and I discussed last night. So for example, if the government were to say that we are only going to procure 5-star rated, that's a stroke of a pen thing where you create a huge market. The other area was district cooling, and I don't think we mentioned district cooling. But again, if you look at a place like Dubai, which is so much smaller, they have much more district cooling projects. And again, it's a simple fix. You could say that you need to do mandatory screening for any project, say 1 million square feet. These are simple fixes, and I'm sure the government of India, people realize it. So is it just inertia, or is there something we're missing?
I think we have to remind ourselves that we're sitting in a really nice hotel with a lot of thermal comfort, talking about a problem that is actually affecting billions around the planet. So for the government to go ahead and start subsidizing the most expensive product that is currently being purchased by 8% of India, it's not politically a very smart move for them to make, right? So I don't think it's that they don't understand the leverage that a green procurement of super efficient low GWP product base will have. It's just that politically it's not I don't think it would be the most sensitive move, or at least that's the political understanding of it. Having said that, I think the government has made considerable strides, right? So whether it is looking at DPIIT's production-linked incentive scheme, which is now encouraging air conditioning manufacturers to invest, in component manufacturing, set up like greater jobs and capacities within India, with the hope that we're going to be a part of the export supply chain, which means that we're readying ourselves for this big transition that's going to also happen in India. We're creating jobs as we do so. More importantly, by expanding your manufacturing base, you're ensuring that more investments are flowing in towards those technologies in R&D as well. And I think that is the way in which the government is approaching it, right? So we've spoken about the standards and labeling program. There's a pitch, there are requests, and I know that there's a lot of movement within the government to also start looking at fans and evaporative coolers, right? And start with a voluntary labeling program for these products that are going to be giving much more thermal comfort to a much larger population base in India than air conditioners. And I think it always comes down to the fiscal competition, right? So should I be spending on fans, which are going to go towards, more than 1 billion people, or should I be looking at air conditioners? Because the size of the environmental problem with air conditioners is much bigger as far as climate change is concerned. So I think the government will always sort of have issue with that, but you have to find what works for which ministry and have that conversation with them. I think there was a colleague from AFT who was talking about changing the vocabulary depending on which organization you're talking to, right? So for us at CEW, for instance, when we talk to the ozone cell, we are talking about thermal comfort for all. We're not talking about, increased bottom lines, for the HVAC industry in India. But when we're talking to DPIIT, we are definitely talking about the increasing number of jobs and what this means for the GDP, right? So I think that language needs to change. Seeing an overarching subsidy on the final product from the government of India is wishful at this point, given also what else is happening in the country. But I think finding more pragmatic programs and initiatives that will actually help move the needle on the same front, right? And that could just be a bunch of companies coming together and going for bulk procurement.
Thank you. Any other interventions from the floor? There's one over there.
Thank you. My name is Deepak Malik. I work with the bank. I have a follow-up question from Abhas. Subsidies are fine to, support installations. But the problem is that, we are dealing with the operators and not regulators. For example, the electricity board, they sell electricity and they earn from it, and they have pact with other institutions to, for supply a minimum amount of. And what happens is that in that game, the consumer who are installing these, they get demotivated from getting these things installed. Do you think there is a way to, promote installations, more installation of solar for local public? Okay, if the question is not clear, I can probably make it more clear. For example, the DISCOMs provide subsidies on, or they say on grid, what they do is that they do plus minus off. But they are changing tariffs almost every month, or and that is demotivating. Earlier, it was almost 5 years of return pay for the solar installation which you install. But now it has gone to 7 years. And if they keep on doing so, it will become 9 years. So what is the fun in installing those things? If government, on one way they are promoting it, and on the other hand they are demoting it.
If I have understood correctly, the changing policies and the rates of the DISCOMs is an issue for people's decision to install solar. So yes, that's a point well taken. I myself in Bangalore, I wanted to install on my new house. When I started, it was 9 rupees per unit, the buyback rate by the DISCOM. But when I almost went near my construction completion and then put up the solar, they reduced it to 3 rupees. So now what do you decide? At that point I decided no, but what I will do is the cost of power increases. So sooner or later, but one has to be consistent with those policies. Then you would have seen more roof solar. So that's something, when the DISCOM itself pays so heavily to generators in purchase, that has to be passed on. So there has to be some generous way of sharing that costs and benefits. I agree with your point, if I'm right.
Yes, same. Actually, I also have installed a big unit, and what has happened is that my return period was 5 years. Now, given that now DISCOM in Rajasthan pays me 2 rupees back for what I generate, now my return has gone from 5 to 8 years.
So the piece I take from this is one of these truisms of public policy, that policy consistency is probably more important than the substance of the policy in terms of driving innovation as we go forward. Can I turn we've probably got 15 minutes left, maybe turn the question a little bit. This is a little bit to finance. We could talk a lot about finance. But I'd like to ask our panelists, except for Arnab for obvious reasons, if we as the World Bank Group want to put money into the cooling sector, either from the IFC side on the private sector side, or from the bank itself on the public sector side, what would you advise as the best areas and the best way to put that financing in? And it's a little bit of a leading question, because presumably you then have to think about the rest of the financing architecture without being explicit about it. But what would you see the bank should focus on? The bank group.
Actually, I think your team has done a really good job of strategizing where the money should go. They're really well on point when they're talking about different elements of market readiness, right? So I think looking at the servicing sector, which is responsible for 40% of your refrigerant consumption, that's a really smart move because you will need standardized technologies, you will need business models, you will need consumer awareness, and you will probably need some sort of a regulatory mandate to ensure that it happens. That would be one area. And the second one would be in cold chain, moving to the rural parts of India. So rather than looking at, what happens once it's in the city or just the logistics of farm to fork, I think it would be really interesting to see what comes out of actually setting up value addition enterprises in the rural parts of the economy, hopefully using decentralized renewable energy.
So focus on the market failures, focus on those more complicated segments of this pattern, and accompany it with regulatory action.
I would pitch for the affordable housing, because we are building millions, and we are likely to build millions as you go, because the population increases. When the families split, they split, there is going to be more and more housing coming by. So it's the housing that is currently there is a good asset, but you have to make them more performing assets. Again, I would say the green powerhouses. So, and if you look at it, the growth of residential building space, residential space cooling requirement is going to be humongous. So look at the this scope for super efficient fans. You have the scope to reduce the cost, just the way LED happened, 500, 600 rupees per light to, it is now 65 to 100 rupees. So fans right now about 3,000, 4,000 rupees. It will slide down. So if I look at it, I think that's one big area. Why I took affordable housing is socially relevant. Then the second area could be the agriculture value chain. Particularly, people are, some of the seasons we see, they just decide to throw their produce, because they will, even if they go to the market, they won't get that price. So can we look at that value chain, strengthening that value chain Right now there is something, but for potatoes, some of these fixed 2-3 producers, it's fairly fine is what I get to hear. But other producers, there is an enormous thing one can do and put money into this farmers. And Government of India also wants to do double the income of the farmers. And that's possible with this kind of interventions. So
okay, but let me just push you a little bit. I know I want to go to Sanjay, but I can't resist. If you look at the total need for affordable housing in India, it's huge, okay? And if you look at the kinds of investments and the priorities for farmers to improve their incomes, it's also huge. So within, even if we're talking about those areas, where would we be able to get the best leverage for our World Bank Group money in any of those areas, and what would be an efficient way to get the biggest area of leverage? Around the cooling agenda, not the border.
Yeah, if you look at it, there are missing links for these things to happen. So World Bank should look at what are those missing links. This is not happening. The agriculture value chain or the residential building take off on the solar. What our friend just now said. You and me, we don't put up solar roof because we calculate and then it doesn't work. Why it is not working? Those are the things, whether it is policy, whether it is innovation or the products cost should be reduced. These are the areas that one has to see, which I've kind of articulated to an extent in this document, and invest there. So my pitch would be residential building investments in particularly the delta. The basic building is kind of incentivized by the government to the tune of 50%, and then topped up by loan. And then this 15% of the element is something World Bank could look at. And there's huge potential for that. You can make a few thousand or a few million, and it's possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Sanjay, any thoughts? I'm sure you've got lots of thoughts. Could you share them?
Yeah. John, to my mind, I still would pitch in that we all should concentrate on the social housing segment, the residential segment. That's the biggest, in terms of the benefits of climate change, that's the biggest impacts that you're going to see. Socially, you're going to see the biggest impacts. There are reports that are coming in every day that the heat waves are going to become more severe in the years ahead. It's going to impact the lives of people. You're going to see fatalities happening. I think, and the Government of India has a mission around it, and the Prime Minister himself is kind of pushing it top down. Nothing could be more important to me than working on thermal comforts for the economically weaker sections, for the housing, for the largest segment of people who are yet to get a move into a house, into a shelter. So I think the World Bank would really be able to make huge amount of impacts, working with the states for the kind of country that we are, the size of the country. I think the impacts will be very, very visible. You need to really work on, building up the critical mass in terms of resources within the states that are required for making sure that they are able to deliver on the promises made under the schemes of the Prime Minister. So I think, to my mind, that's the biggest investment portfolio that the World Bank should look at. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So between all of you, I think, I hope Mehul's happy. I think there's some resonance with what you had in the report, maybe a little bit of nuance, but there's largely some degree of overlap. I don't know whether they agreed beforehand or they just read your report, but that's good. We have like 5 minutes left, so I want to give each of you 1 minute. We've talked about the importance of this issue. We've talked about a lot of issues, a lot of things that can be fixed, lots of good ideas. If there was one thing that you felt would be the most important thing to accelerate this sector, the cooling sector in India, what would it be? Number one priority. Not 27 different things, not this and this and this, but what would be the one thing that you think would drive this agenda to deliver on the promise? Let's start with Sanjay, and then I'll run this way across the panel.
So I think, John, I would say that we would probably put, design interventions as far as the housing sector is concerned. I'm just sticking to the built environment, and that's the reason. I think if you really want to see thermal comforts happening, design interventions become the key as far as this sector is concerned. Thank you.
Okay.
So we are sitting in this workshop, talking about the state participation and partnerships. So my wish list is each of the state develop an equivalent of a cooling action plan, align well with the other, their climate action plan, their energy policy, their logistic policy. I think that
Let's take a short 10-minute break before we start the valedictory session. Please proceed for tea or coffee.
Hello. 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 Hello.
I request everyone to kindly take your seats so that we can proceed with the valedictory session.
Hello.
I request everyone to kindly proceed into the ballroom and take your seats as the valedictory session will begin shortly. I request all guests to kindly take their seats so that we can begin the session. Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome all the distinguished speakers and guests to the valedictory session of the India Climate and Development Partners Meet on behalf of the Government of Kerala and the World Bank. As part of various intriguing sessions over the course of the last 2 days, we have witnessed structured dialogue between various stakeholders in the field of climate and development. I would like to invite all the distinguished speakers onto the dais. Mr. Safirullah, Secretary, Department of Finance, Government of Kerala. Mr. Abhas Jha, the Practice Manager, World Bank. Shri Parameshwaran Nair, the CEO of Niti Aayog, would be joining us virtually. Mr. John A. Room, Regional Director of South Asia Sustainable Development, World Bank. Dr. Annapurna Vancheshwaran, Managing Director of the Nature Conservatory. Dr. Swati Bogle, Member, Governing Board, Clean Energy Access Network. Ms. Shikha Basan, Senior Program Lead, Council on Energy, Environment and Water. Ms. Yashika Malik, Climate Change Specialist, the World Bank. Firstly, I would like to invite Mr. Mohammad Safirullah, Secretary, Government of Kerala, to convey his reflections on the meet.
Distinguished dignitaries, friends, good evening. It has been a wonderful 2.5 days where we learned a lot on behalf of Government of Kerala and Rebuild Kerala Initiative RKI. First, I would like to thank World Bank and all the delegates, all distinguished guests who have come here to Kerala for this wonderful 2-day workshop. Just like to share 3 points as reflections. The first one is that we have a lot of learnings to do together. We are making out a lot of action plan for ourselves as envisaged in the state action plan, and in the next few years we will be taking them very diligently so that we achieve our 2050 goal as was released yesterday. Secondly, in terms of the next immediate or short-term initiatives, in association with many of the multilateral agencies, we have our coastal protection project, we have our agriculture renovation mission, we have P4R for the next few years. These are all initiatives which we are expecting will help us build a resilient society in our state, and this is what we'll be trying to prioritize and take them forward with the learning of the last 2 days. Third and finally, in terms of the association with the private sector, many of the interventions which IFC and other distinguished guests have shared today, that is also something that the government will try to facilitate and see how we can act like a catalyst. Once again, I would like to thank all the distinguished delegates who have come here for the last couple of days. And I would like to thank World Bank for having given the state of Kerala a wonderful opportunity for hosting this workshop. And we are happy and we are looking forward to working together with all the delegates in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Mr. Abhas Jha to share his reflections on the meet.
So before I begin, I noticed that Mr. Parameshwaran Iyer has joined. Welcome, sir, and I'm so glad you could join us. So this has been a very, very productive 2 days. And before I go any further, could I request that the RKI team who helped put this together and the World Bank team, could you just stand up so that we can give you a big round of applause? Just stand up if you were involved in the... Thank you so much. I know how much effort goes into these events, and really it has been a wonderful 2 days. So, just to summarize, and for the benefit of Mr. Iyer also, who's joined us. So, we see this dialogue at the beginning of and not the end of the process. We hope to make this an annual event. Why did we do this? As I mentioned at the beginning, India, each state in India is like a country. There are so many interesting things happening on the topic of climate resilience. States can learn from each other. We had the private sector here, we had civil society here, we had academia. So really, given the magnitude of the challenge of how does India continue to grow, how do you reduce poverty in the face of this enormous challenge of climate change, I think there were a number of ideas that were put on the table. And let me just focus on 4 of these. So the first, I think, message and takeaway was the need for this kind of broad-based engagement. Government cannot do it alone. The private sector cannot do it alone. You need the whole of society to come together, and that means the government at different levels, national government, state, local governments. Then you have the private sector, you have civil society, you have academia. So that's, I think, number 1. Second, when we had the discussion with Sharda, it was just staggering the kind of innovative work they're doing on locally led climate action here in Kerala, and there are many examples from other states also. So this importance of subnational action was brought out very clearly, that we really need to catalog and cross-fertilize these good practices that are happening on climate resilience, and Kerala really stands out as a great example. Third point is on finance, and I think the session with Mr. Rajat Mishra from DEA, it was very interesting in that clearly what institution like the bank will bring is a very small portion of the huge investment needs. So it's all about leveraging. How do you leverage private finance by using scarce resources? How do we bring to bear new innovative financial instruments? And we talked about things like blue bonds or carbon markets, credit risk enhancements. I'm so glad that Wendy from IFC could join because at the discussion at the youth panel, it was clear that there are many, many innovative ideas which are not getting the finance that they need. So how do we kind of bridge this valley of death to bring some of these ideas to commercial scale? And then finally, I would say that, the partnerships will make us stronger. So we need to build on these, conversations that we've had in these 2 days, both inside the room but also outside, and kind of take this to the next level. So with that, let me stop, and I'm going to ask Mr. Iyer to please deliver the valedictory address. Sir, over to you.
Thanks, Abbas, and good afternoon to everyone. And for a while there, when I got disconnected, I was looking at an image of John. Hi, John, in sort of animated conversation with someone else. But good to reconnect with many friends, colleagues, and good afternoon to all of you from Delhi. So very happy to be at this first India Climate and Development Partners meeting. I think as I was listening to Abbas, it's a great opportunity for states, private sector, the civil society, the government of India to come together to sort of deliberate on these crucial issues of climate and development generally. And I think as India is embarking on a very ambitious agenda of both achieving a $5 trillion economy along with dealing with the challenges of climate change, I think many of the lessons which are coming out of this 2-day workshop will be very useful as we go forward. I think that just to take this idea forward on what can we do about it, right? And it's how do we move from sort of theory and deliberations to action on the ground. And that's something which we at NITI have been working with ministries and state governments to talk about. And I'm very glad that we're talking about customized solutions for states. As Abbas mentioned, every state needs its own unique pathway, both to both mitigation, adaptation, but also to development and green development. So in this regard, more recently, over the last year or so, the Prime Minister has been talking about what can individuals and communities do as well. So kind of bottom-up approach to climate, which is about how do you change behavior. And there have been a few studies, one from UNEP, which has actually shown that individual behavior can itself bring down emissions by up to 20%. But this program, which is actually going to trigger, so it's on the one level, it's about what people can do at an individual level, but how can that then trigger supply to cater to that demand? And so how will the corporate sector, the private sector, respond to communities demanding sort of greener products and greener policies, if you like, and practices? And then we move into the policy arena. So really it's about how do you sort of match demand and supply. And if you bring that to the circular economy practiced by individuals and corporations, as you know, the Prime Minister announced the Circular Economy Mission last August. And NITI is working with the Ministry of Environment to take this forward. We just had a discussion today, and put out some numbers which McKinsey has put out recently. The material circularity alone, in terms of bringing down emissions, is the second highest. After the whole, it's 11% or 12%. So, in the circular economy, which I think is hopefully would have been discussed at this meeting, we are focusing on how can we bring that to the states in these different sectors, whether it's steel or fertilizer or urban or solid waste. And so I think the role of the states, and I know this has been a gathering of the states as well, is really critical. In NITI, we have started the State Support Mission, where we are working with the states on a kind of tailor-made, bespoke basis. What are the demands of the state as they move towards, if we want to use the term the bank uses, a green, resilient, inclusive development. And climate is at the heart of that discussion. So whether it's in terms of mitigation or adaptation, how are states really mainstreaming resilience into their developmental trajectory? So NITI is working with multiple states. And initially in phase 1, we are looking at about 12 to 15 states where our teams are working with the states. We're bringing in other experts as well. And we've had a discussion with the bank, with August and his team as well. And so the bank is working with us along with other development partners to really come up with tailor-made solutions on climate, but also climate and development with states. So I'm sure that some of these deliberations which have come out of the last 2 days discussion can be brought and mainstreamed into our overall engagement with the states. And then, of course, the whole issue of climate financing is obviously front and center of the G20 discussion. And the real challenge, of course, is with the scarce public sector resources, how can we leverage those, but also MDB financing to crowd in private capital? And, I know the IFC has done a lot of work in this along with bank colleagues, but a lot of people have been thinking about this. There's a CEO's forum on this at which I participated a couple of days back. And so, whether it's through guarantees, different instruments, I think this is going to be the big challenge of incentivizing and de-risking private capital into the whole, into this whole discussion. So again, that is front and center of the discussion. I think you would have discussed this, but it would be good to move on to more practical solutions and really walk the talk on climate financing, and including bringing in private capital financing and into this whole discussion on climate. So I'm very glad you've had these deliberations. I wish I could have been there in Kerala myself, but look forward to taking up some of the outcomes of the conference forward. So in NITI, we're very happy to partner both with our multilateral partners, especially the World Bank, but we're also working directly with the states. So hopefully we can do this together so that we can complement each other's efforts. And I look forward to hearing more about the outcomes and following up on the conference. So congratulations again on a very productive conference, and hope to be in touch soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank Thank you very much, sir. And I'm so glad that you could join. I know how busy you are, but thanks for taking the time.
Thanks.
John,
thanks.
Annapurna? Okay. So I think Swati has to leave, right? Okay, so then Annapurna and Swati. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think I'm supposed to be giving some impressions of the 2 days that we have. And I think there are 4 very important words that the conference and the meeting that we've had is impactful, informative, motivating, and inspiring. So that's how I would look at it. And why would it be impactful? You had the Chief Minister actually announcing something very impressive, talking about the version 2.0 of their work, and that gives other states a lot of hope. And this was on this stage, which I felt was very impactful. And more important was the number of government officials participating and spending the entire day with us, which we don't see in many of the events. And I think I respect Kerala and the government of Kerala for that, and the young bureaucrats who were there with us. Having said that, looking at information, of course, given the number of thought leaders in the room with multilateral institutions, organizations, think tanks, and research organizations, it was great to hear and see the people showcasing their experiences. Motivating, why I say motivating is that I have to submit that having seen Dia Mirza's name on the agenda, it was a bit confusing at the moment, at that time. But then, after hearing her speak, one could understand, it brought to the attention the power of art and communication, which is so important when we want to reach out to the last mile, as we keep saying, and how easy it is to infuse change that we want if we communicate it well and say it well. So I think it was such a blend, and what a motivating session that was. Inspiring, John, you have mentioned a couple of times that you brought young minds to the table, brimming and bubbling with thoughts, and I'm sure, as I mentioned to a colleague of mine very clearly, that it's not just food for thought for you, but it might be a feast for thought from the children that you talked about. And let me just quickly end. I did mention to John in the beginning that, in his humble and modest way, he mentioned a couple of times the World Bank support, and that perhaps it's just a drop in the ocean. But my take here is that supporting a well-thought vision or a plan can be an extremely important catalyst to move ahead. And sometimes World Bank gives that edge to some organizations, some institutions, someone to think and look at the efficacy of it, which the government takes it. And let me give you an example. This was the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition. And in 2016, I was at TERI at that time. We were asked to do the preparedness of the industry to see what they can do on carbon pricing. And we did that. And this was the World Bank's thoughtful vision to see, and you can see the difference that is there in the country at the moment. So I stop here saying that it's been 2 very well worth days for me, at least.
I speak, first of all, thanks a lot for inviting me. I was a little confused about what I would do here, but I said I must not miss this opportunity. So it's been an excellent 2 days. And I think I'll briefly, in bullet points, talk about my key takeaways from this event. The first thing is that somewhere I could see that I was able to join the dots from think global to act local. Because, we had people, from COP27 to people like me, working at the grassroots. So for me, that entire spectrum of speakers and was very important. The other thing that I thought my takeaway was that it's not all doom and gloom for climate. I know that if we all put our heads and hearts and hands and legs together, together we can. That's the message I'm taking away. because there is a role for everybody in trying to work in this sector. Simple things like what she said about planting trees, each villager one tree, and quite a bit of the problem is already solved. Then let me just say is that last week I was at the Indian Institute of Science where I discussed with the Brain Research Center scientists on early warning systems for Alzheimer. And today I hear a lot of early warning systems for disaster. So my takeaway is that these early warning systems are relevant across the board for not just disasters, but for anything and everything planning. Especially I saw that it was so enabled with data. It made a lot of sense, and my one major takeaway is the importance of early warning systems, and that the message should reach everybody at the right time. Then there was the other thing that I see is that the ecosystem preparedness is what everybody was talking about, but I think the challenges are both are dynamic, and so the solutions must also be dynamic, and the ecosystems must be constantly evolving, and that also is what I understood, that we should not, we should not take ecosystem for granted, saying that once it's done, it will solve, everybody will jump in and feed into that. And then the last point is that I think some of the state level action plans and the ecosystem that gives us a lot of opportunities for micro level planning. And we can use the data at the district level, at the taluk level, and we can come up with village level action plans, cluster level, neighborhood level action plans, and I look forward to looking at data from some of these state action plans to actually start the process of micro planning with community participation in the days and months to come. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for having me up here again. So when I got the invite and Karan had asked me if I would be available to come, and I said, well, yes, if you're asking me, I know it's more of a statement than a question when it comes from Karan. So I had agreed to definitely be here. And I have to say that the last couple of days have been very enriching. In the capacity of just being a partner to the bank in the ecosystem, right? I mean, the 7 years that I've been at CW, I've actually not done any work with the bank in any sort of a contractual manner. But especially once the cooling work started coming in, and even otherwise, you sort of recognize that you are operating in the same ecosystem. You are trying to solve problems for the same client. Most of the times, it is the government of India, some ministry therein, or a state-level government. And so that's why over the last couple of days, like just hearing different perspectives and narratives from colleagues at the bank, but also at AFD, ADB, KFW, like understanding how the problem statement and the narrative around it is being shaped. Placing that in the stark failure that most of us agree that COP27 or the COP processes are taking us towards, recognizing the size of the challenge globally, and yet agreeing that the size of the challenge in India is an opportunity, right? I think seeing the prism of negativity and yet trying to respond to it in an optimistic manner through data, through ideas, through financing instruments, through investment plans, research catalogs that have been released, state-level plans that have been put out. It's been extremely enriching, and I'm really glad that I was here. So thank you very much for having me. I think it becomes extremely important for us, and that's why in particular I want to take a few seconds to talk about the state-level prioritization that has been already alluded to. But I think it's really important that we understand the capacity constraints with which we also work in this country in particular. I mean, I think all governments have capacity constraints, but I think in India, they're very visible to all of us. And One is understanding the political nuancing of the problem that we are trying to solve for. So what ministry is looking for what state is prioritizing which development issue area, but also what are you competing with in that domain, right? And who are the colleagues perhaps within the bank that you will therefore have to compete with to try and push that agenda forward. And how do you do that in a way that is collaborative first within your own institution before you try and take it to the prospective client? I think that is a lesson that we're all very aware of, but I'm not sure how many of us have internalized just as yet. And I think that's why this state level attention that is being paid to the sorts of announcements that have been made by Kerala are a hugely refreshing welcome, and it's been great to have time and space actually given to that. It would have been, for me, one of my takeaways is also to understand the institutional processes that were put in place to arrive, at these policy charters, and who all played a role in that public policy ecosystem, because it can and it should never be a single entity, right? It should always be a little bit more democratic, at least, than that. So my congratulations to the bank as well as to the government of Kerala on an excellent and very enriching last couple of days. I think for me personally, it was also really wonderful to have been a part of the India Cooling Action Plan, recognizing back then that, ideally we would like the likes of the World Bank to someday come up with an investment strategy to fund a part of it. So it's great, that in the last couple of days, the media is talking about it, we here are talking about it, and my congratulations to the entire team on that front. I also wear a hat of a climate negotiations person at CEW, and as perhaps not optimistic the conversation yesterday was on COP, I think the conversation this morning that was talking about resilience, also because it had the participation of so many people working at multiple levels of governance, again left a lot of room to be able to figure out what really is the data that can help solve for it, right? What really is the business model that no one is thinking about that can push us in that direction. I'm leaving with a lot of things to think about and hopefully some ideas for all of us to action together. Thank you and congratulations again.
Wow, okay. It's a tough act to follow. All these great insights from the 2 days. So let me go back to where I started in my welcoming address. Even though India has not been a major contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions, the country has made very ambitious commitments to both reducing emissions and increasing resilience in order to allow the country to grow. And even though commitments are important, by themselves they don't really mean a hell of a lot. It's track record and performance that matters. And the good news is that you're seeing in India, in a large number of areas, good track record. Rolling out renewables. I like using the LED light bulbs example, early warning systems, a whole range. I could go on and on and on with a whole bunch. Social protection systems, a bunch of good practices. And so when you take the two of those together, it really does look possible for India to continue to grow to meet its high income targets while reducing emissions in a way that's consistent with the Paris Agreement and building climate resilience. But it's not going to be easy. Okay, I can say that very glibly, but there's a huge amount of hard work and trade-offs that need to take place underneath that. And as I said, that requires deep partnerships with a lot of people coming together, and our expectation for this event was that that would be an opportunity to bring these partnerships together. From where I'm sitting, these 2 days have over-delivered on that. So if I walk away, if I was sort of glass half full, cautiously optimistic, I'm walking away even more optimistic. In part because it's not only India as a whole, it's what's happening in Kerala. So everything I've said about India applies equally to Kerala. We've seen it at the state level. But that's not the only reason I'm walking away more optimistic than when I came in. The one thing that absolutely impressed me was the quality of the interventions and engagement of all the people that are here. It started with the youth representatives, okay? If only I could have been that articulate at the age of 22 and that committed and having done that much, you know? Most 40-year-olds haven't done that. Then we had the panels. On each panel, we could have gone on and run 3 to 4 hour panels on every single one of them. We just scratched the surface. And it wasn't just glib. Okay, I can be glib and summarize in 30 seconds. But there's all this depth that sits behind it. And the reason there's depth in the panelists is there's all of this work that's been done in this deep thinking that's before. This is just the top that you're seeing. And then, as I might have mentioned before, at the event the other night, there were all of these entrepreneurs with all these great ideas just looking to drive it going forward. And in the end, you can have commitments and institutions and all the rest of it, but in the end, people have to deliver. It's people and the quality and the commitment and the alignment that matters. And so I walk away with that much more, even more optimistic than I was before. Some people accuse us of being pathologically optimistic. I hope we're sort of cautiously optimistic. Tough hill to climb, but it can be done. So in terms of the specific takeaway, a lot of this was focused on the state level. And so what I see is 3 words: deepen, widen, complement. So deepen, I think from this discussion, we've got opportunities to deepen what we're doing in Kerala. Okay, it's been adapting, it's been working well, but there's still all of the stuff to be done, and we've got an opportunity to deepen this partnership and continue it. Widen it, I think it's really clear that other states can do the same thing. Some of them have started, and they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can probably halve the development time that Kerala took to go to where they are just by copying and learning and having this lighthouse effect. And then complementing, there's a bunch of things to be done at the state level, but there's also stuff to be done at the union level, and there's an opportunity to drive that. So, very optimistic. I was struck that in various forms, you all made the 2 comments. One was the importance of a framework and a vision that's shared to drive it, and you said connect the dots. And I think that is very important, and I think that hearing what's happening in this meeting, I really think we're getting there. We might not be perfect, we might not have exactly the same vision, and we might not all be connecting all of the dots in the same way, but we're making good progress, and moving in that direction, I think, is absolutely important. All of that very positive. The one area where I would encourage us all to think and push ourselves to get to the next level, and that is prioritization and a bias to action. Because what did strike me in the discussion, there are lots of ideas. There's lots of analytics. All of us can describe what's going on, and we've all got 20 ideas for action, and it's and. In the end, we're going to have to focus. I'm using we generically. We at the World Bank, government of Kerala, private sector, civil society, all, we're going to have to focus. And if there's an alignment between the actors as to what's important, if we're all focusing and prioritizing more or less in the same sorts of things, the impact is just going to be huge. So hopefully, as Abbas said, as we move forward with these kinds of engagements, we can use this kind of forum to finish the job of the shared vision and framework, finish the job of connecting the dots, and then hopefully the next meeting will focus, what are the priorities, what is the action? No more discussion of describing or analytics, but focus on the action. So I'm coming away extremely motivated on this, wanting to double down on our commitments as the World Bank, and I hope I can speak for Wendy, the World Bank Group, in order to drive this agenda even more aggressively, and so that's great. I would like to focus, to just finish with an additional thank you. I want to first fully support Abbas's thanks to the World Bank team and the RKI team. You guys pulled off an amazing thing here. And to be honest, it's an iceberg. Anything you see in terms of what was done is only 1/9 of all the work that's there. 8/9 of the iceberg is below the water. And the dog didn't bark on a number of things worked smoothly. That doesn't happen automatically. There's a whole army that probably none of you even met that delivered a lot of this. And so I'm not even going to name the leaders of the teams deliberately, because I know there's a whole bunch of other people sitting beneath them that do it. And I would also like to do a shout out to the tech support, the hotel staff, and everybody else that made this happen. As they say, if the hygiene isn't good, the meeting isn't good. So we've got to keep the hygiene and the technology running. So that was great. So from my side, huge thank you to everybody, leaving this really much more motivated to keep going. So thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for staying with us for the last couple of days. It's my privilege to be delivering the vote of thanks for the first India Climate and Development Partners Meet. This meet would not have been possible without many moving parts coming together. We would like to acknowledge the support and guidance we've been provided throughout. Let me begin by acknowledging the unflinching support by the Government of Kerala for co-hosting this particular meet, as well as our long-standing partnership beginning with post-disaster recovery after the 2018 Kerala floods. Under the able leadership of Honorable Chief Minister, the partnership has now moved forward to mainstreaming resilience and low-carbon pathways for Kerala. Chief Secretary Dr. V.P. Joy has led from front, and the entire state machinery has moved along with him. I would like to thank Mr. Biswanath Sinha, Additional Chief Secretary Finance, for his valuable support. I would be failing in my duty if I don't acknowledge the support and strategic advice that has been provided by Dr. Venu Vasudevan, Additional Chief Secretary Environment, and Dr. Sarda Muralidharan, Additional Chief Secretary Local Self-Government. Dear Sir and Madam, your enthusiasm and perseverance continue to drive us towards excellence. A grand thank you. We would also like to specially acknowledge the support of MOEFCC and NITI Aayog under the guidance of Secretary MOEFCC Ms. Leena Nandan and Sri Parameswaran Iyer, Chief Executive Officer NITI Aayog, for their leadership in steering the climate agenda forward for the country. At the World Bank Group, we aspire to create platforms that initiate dialogue on effective partnerships to move the needle on low carbon, inclusive and equitable, climate-resilient development path. The first edition of the India Climate and Development Partners Meet would not have been possible without the unwavering support of the panelists and the moderators who have traveled from various parts of the globe to generate engaging and exciting themes over the courses of these 2 days. Reflections by Abbas and our panelists throughout various sessions have equipped us with knowledge, insights, and engagement strategies going forward. A big thank you to all of you. As they say, together we are stronger. I would like to acknowledge and thank our development partners, AFT, ADB, KFW, UNEP, and others who came together not only for this partners meet, but also for our development engagements on climate change and building resilience. Please accept my heartfelt gratitude. We hope to continue this relationship forward. A very big thank you. On behalf of the organizers, let me extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all the participants for gracing us with your important work and sharing with us your findings and opinions. Thank you very much. And an event like this would not have happened overnight. The wheels started rolling months ago. It requires planning and a bird's eye for detail. We have been fortunate enough to be backed by a team of very motivated and dedicated colleagues of RKI who have been our strong allies in Kerala Partnership and also the co-host for the Partners Meet. I would like to make a special mention of Mr. Safirullah, Mr. Sunil Kumar, Simi, Nagin, Venugopal, Shinoj, Joe, Varsha, Elizabeth, Lakshmi, and the entire team working tirelessly behind the scenes. I'm sure that more than the professional partnerships, this meet has forged strong friendships as well. A very big thank you to all of you. The sectoral teams from the World Bank and IFC, represented by Wendy Jo Werner here, are some of us present. I would like to acknowledge their support in putting some of the enriching sessions together. A big thank you to all of you. Let me take a moment to thank our Regional Director, John Room, and our Practice Manager, Abbas Cha. Without their able guidance and strategic vision, getting together an event like this wouldn't have been possible. A big thank you to both of you. I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge our partner organizations who support us in our work. Some of them are here: Deloitte, Intellicap, CEW, TERI, IORA, CPR, C-STEP, TNC, WRI, among others. A big thank you to our logistics partner, Leela Kovalam, Taj Kovalam, 4S Communications, the White Feather Cabs, who ensured the smooth functioning of this event. During this meet, we maximized the use of electric vehicles, which was supported by the Kerala State Road Transport Corporation. So thank you for ensuring that we reach safely, on time, and with minimum emissions. I also extend my thanks to the State Protocol Department for their enormous cooperation in organization of this event. Thank you all. Lastly, I would like to mention that I am extremely lucky to be part of this well-knit team of young and seasoned professionals, which we refer to as the South Asia Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management Team at the World Bank. The team came together as a well-oiled machine to put together this meet. I would like to individually acknowledge Deepak Singh, Thomas Kerr, Anup, Karan, Aarti, Henrike, Piyush, Mehul, Heather, Sumit, Anil, Deepak Malik, Manzoor, and Vedish. I would like to make a special mention to Mr. Adarsh Kumar, who supported this event through strategic advice for curating the sessions. A big thank you to all of you. Our team is driven by a set of bright and energetic young professionals who are the foundation of this meet. Monica and Mani worked on conceptualizing and implementing this partners meet that we witnessed over the last 2 days. And they were ably supported by Ritu, Devika, Rishu, and Khayati. A big thank you to them. Come on, we can go louder. And I cannot thank enough for involvement and willingness of all the participants to take the completion of tasks beyond their comfort zone. So I would like to close with saying that we would like to take this opportunity to place on record our heartfelt thanks to everyone present at the event. Thank you once again. And apologies if I missed anyone. You've been a part of a big team that has made it happen and deliver. Thank you all.
Good evening, everyone. Please proceed for high tea, which is being served right now. Thank you.